What if I told you that Mercedes could lose everything, even after a great result in Japan? Because while many were celebrating the team's performance in Suzuka, the reality is that the FIA uncovered a problem that completely changes history. George Russell's car could have been operating outside the limits of the regulations without anyone noticing. Until now. A key system, invisible to the viewer but decisive in performance, that did not meet the times required by the regulations, twice what was allowed. And the most worrying thing is not just the ruling, it is what it could mean: illegal advantage, pressure from rivals, and a possible intervention that could stop Mercedes in its tracks in the middle of the fight for the championship. Ferrari, McLaren, and Red Bull have already reacted. And when three giants unite against you in Formula One, this stops being a simple technical problem and becomes a war. What we saw at the 2026 Japanese GP was, on the surface, a show of strength from Mercedes, but in reality it was the beginning of a crack that now threatens to break the entire project from within. Because while the results on the track could justify optimism, a storm was brewing in the offices that completely changed the team's narrative. Mercedes arrived at Suzuka in a solid position in the championship, with George Russell leading the internal fight and consolidating himself as the team's leader, while the young Kimi Antonelli began to show enormous potential. The car seemed competitive, balanced, and, above all, capable of standing up to structures like Ferrari or McLaren. But that image of stability hit a problem that had been brewing since previous races, and that exploded at just the worst possible moment. It all really starts in China, not Japan. That's where rivals begin to notice something strange in the behavior of the Mercedes, specifically in the front wing. It wasn't obvious to the naked eye, but in Formula One the details are everything. During a direct duel, especially in high downforce maneuvers, it was detected that the system was not responding as it should. What seemed like a simple anomaly ended up becoming a formal suspicion, and later a direct complaint. The critical point is the reaction time of the system. According to the regulations, the wing must close in a maximum of 400 milliseconds. But Russell's car was taking approximately twice as long. This is not a minor detail, because this delay completely alters the aerodynamic behavior of the car, especially at key moments such as braking or corner entry. And this is where the big doubt arises: was it really a flaw or a hidden advantage? From that moment on, the situation gets out of control. Ferrari takes the first step and takes the case to the FIA. McLaren joins in. Red Bull too. And what was a technical suspicion becomes a political conflict within the paddock. Because when several teams agree on pointing out the same weak point of a rival, we are no longer talking about interpretation. We are talking about direct pressure. Mercedes tries to contain the situation with a clear explanation. It is not a sought-after advantage, it is a hydraulic problem. According to the team and Russell himself, the system was not working correctly due to a pressure failure that prevented the wing from closing properly. That is, they were not gaining performance. They were suffering a failure. But here's the problem. In modern Formula One, the regulations do not judge intentions. They judge results. And if the system doesn't comply, it doesn't matter why. Meanwhile, the FIA enters the scene. Not with an immediate sanction, but with something equally dangerous: a deep technical investigation. And that completely changes the scenario because it forces Mercedes to justify every detail of its design just at the moment when the championship begins to be defined. And this is where everything starts to get really dangerous for Mercedes, because the FIA investigation not only calls into question one part, it calls into question the entire concept of the car. Because once the agency comes in to review a system like the front wing, it does not limit itself to checking whether it complies or not. It goes much further. It analyzes behavior, telemetry, responses in different phases of the curve, and above all, it seeks to understand whether this failure could have generated an indirect advantage. And this is key because even if Mercedes did not design it with the intention of making a profit, the simple fact of having had it already changes the competitive balance. The problem is that this delay in closing the spoiler is not neutral. It directly affects the aerodynamic flow of the car. At certain times, this extra time could allow a different load than expected to be maintained, altering the balance when braking or when cornering. And in Formula One, a small variation in that behavior can translate into tenths per lap, which in the end are the difference between winning or losing. This is where rivals see the opportunity. Because they are no longer questioning just an irregularity, they are insinuating that Mercedes has been able to compete with aerodynamic behavior outside the regulations during several races. And this completely changes the narrative. If the FIA confirms that the system does not comply, any previous results automatically come into discussion, and the pressure begins to grow, inside and outside the team. On the one hand, Mercedes is forced to defend its position publicly, insisting that it is a hydraulic reliability problem, something that even in its own words harmed the car's performance in certain situations. But on the other hand, they know perfectly well that this will not be enough if the FIA considers that the car did not respect the regulations. Because there are no interpretations here. Either it complies, or it doesn't. Meanwhile, inside the paddock, tension escalates to another level. The meetings with the FIA intensify, the teams begin to exchange information, and what was once a suspicion now becomes an open case that can have immediate consequences. We're not just talking about a technical directive. We're talking about possible mandatory changes, loss of performance, or even worse. And in the middle of all this is George Russell. Because his car is the one at the center of the investigation. And that puts him in an extremely uncomfortable position. Every result, every overtake, every defense on the track is now under the microscope. What was once merit is now also suspicion. And here appears the biggest risk for Mercedes. If the FIA decides to intervene forcefully, they will not only have to modify the car. They could suddenly lose that advantage that kept them in the fight. And in such a tight season, that's not just a technical problem. It's a direct hit to the championship. Because the real question is no longer whether there was a failure. The real question is, what will happen when Mercedes has to run without that system working as it did until now? And now we come to the most critical point in this whole story. Because what the FIA decides in the coming days can completely change the course of Mercedes this season. There is no longer any room for soft interpretations or ambiguous explanations here. The investigation has escalated to a level where the body has to make a clear decision. Either it validates Mercedes' explanation, or it acts to correct a possible irregularity that could have affected the championship since its first races. And if modern Formula One has taught us anything, it is that when the FIA intervenes in the middle of the season, the impact is immediate. If it is confirmed that the spoiler system does not comply with the regulations, Mercedes will be forced to urgently modify the car. But here's the real problem. It's not just about changing a part, it's about altering an aerodynamic behavior that could be integrated into the entire concept of the car. And that, in the middle of the championship, is practically starting from scratch in terms of performance. Because when you touch a key part of the car, everything changes. Balance, tire wear, cornering stability, even the driver's confidence. And in a sport where everything is optimized to the millimeter, any alteration can make you lose that competitive edge that costs so much to build. This puts Mercedes in an extreme situation. On the one hand, they have to react technically, quickly and without margin for error. On the other hand, they have to manage the media and political pressure that continues to grow within the paddock. And they must also protect their drivers, especially George Russell, who now bears the brunt of all this controversy. But the most worrying thing is what comes next. Because even if Mercedes manages to solve the problem and adapt, the damage has already been done. Rivals have detected a weakness. They have seen that the team can be vulnerable. And in Formula One, when that happens, there is no turning back. Ferrari, McLaren and Red Bull are not going to let go of this pressure. They are going to continue pushing, questioning, pushing every limit of the regulations to ensure that Mercedes does not have that advantage again, real or perceived. And that brings us to the most important stage of all. Mercedes no longer only competes on the track. Now they compete against the FIA, against the regulations, and against the narrative that questions everything they have achieved so far. Because if something is clear after the Japanese GP, this is not the end of the problem. It is the start of a war that can define the entire season. And in the end, it all comes down to an uncomfortable reality that Mercedes can't avoid. It no longer matters what they did on the track. It matters how they did it. Because what seemed to be a step forward in performance is now completely conditioned by a doubt that contaminates everything. Every point, every overtake, every result of George Russell comes under suspicion the moment the car does not comply exactly with what the regulations dictate. And in Formula One, that line is absolutely sacred. Mercedes has tried to defend itself, explain it, justify it as a technical problem, but the reality is much harsher. In this sport, even an involuntary failure can cost you everything. Because here the intention is not judged, the result is judged. And the most critical of all is not only what the FIA decides, but what comes next. Because even if Mercedes manages to correct the problem, even if it manages to maintain its competitiveness, it has already lost something much more difficult to recover, the trust of the paddock. From now on, every detail of your car will be analyzed. Every improvement will be questioned. Every performance will be called into question. And that completely changes the game. Because while other teams fight to win races, Mercedes now has to show that it deserves to win them. And that is, perhaps, the most difficult battle of all. Whenever you want, I recommend expanding the first block to make it even more powerful and increase retention from the start. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.